any experience whatsoever can be turned as a support for being present. Oh, it feels like this now, or it is like this now. So just keep that in mind whenever you come to the center or come online to join a Zoom program. As you settle in, once you've sort of done what you need to do to feel like your body is your temple, as we say sometimes, right in the middle. And then it's as if we're practicing trusting the sensitivity that's already here. This, in a way, our human existence is defined by the fact that we're sensitive. And we don't have to choose to be sensitive. It's more about trusting sensitivity, relaxing with the sensitivity that's here, not mistrusting it. Because a lot of times we do mistrust it because we've gotten into these so-called bad habits of not trusting that it's okay to feel what we're feeling. And remember, numbness is a feeling too. So it can be a little bit of a tricky time when we put aside time to sit, whether you're just hanging out in your backyard in a comfortable chair or doing your formal meditation practice or coming to the center or joining online. So just don't presume that the first few minutes of that transition, because really what you're doing is you're reconnecting with a deeper intention. Like, and it's humbling and even humiliating a little bit, because what we're going to realize in that transition from our ordinary state to more of a meditative state is, we're going to realize I've been lost in thought. I haven't been living and being the way I want to live and be. And that it's like, I don't know if I want to feel that. So maybe I'll stay in the realm of delusion and distractedness and being lost in thought, but as practitioners, we cultivate a taste for that yucky feeling of coming back home. Oh yeah, having been lost and now coming back into the experience of the body and the experience of the moment and the experience of my heart and all the content of my heart, emotions, whatever we feel, even numbness, is like this. Home, home sweet home. So happy to be home. Very unpleasant, maybe sometimes, maybe even a lot of the times, but still so happy to be home. Because when we're home, we're not feeling the stress of neurotically avoiding feeling what it feels like to be human, to have a body and a mind, to have a life. So even though it might be unpleasant to be present, there is the pleasure, the bliss, you could say, just to use a different word, the bliss of not running from our lives, or not running from the moment, not being in denial. And we're manifesting or practicing a non-fear. And that's not something, I mean, that's not a small something. That's really potent human work, human spiritual work. So with that said, let's just settle in for our meditation time. Of course, I'll give some instructions during this 30-minute sit or so. Eyes can be open in a relaxed way, gazing down toward the floor, or the eyes can be lightly closed. It is useful to hold the body relatively still, but there may be movements at times, and don't be still in a way that requires tension. We're really cultivating a stillness that comes more from relaxation and just the stability of our sitting posture. And some people find it useful to take a few longer, deeper breaths at the beginning of a sit, just as a way of more fully coming into the experience of the body. But we're not forcing that deeper breathing. It's really taking our time, filling and emptying the lungs, and using that as a way to feel what we're feeling. To abandon distraction and denial and insensitivity. And what I'd encourage us to contemplate over and over and over again, not in a tight way, but just arising out of a more simple and authentic curiosity. Like our theme, it could be considered our theme for this meditation time, is just to become clearer and clearer about the difference between when the mind is present and when the mind is distracted or caught up in thought. So that in this 30-minute period of time or whatever it is, we're going to learn maybe quite a bit, but at least learn something about the nature of the experience of being present. We'll get clearer about what that is and what it isn't. And at the same time, in other moments, we'll get clearer about the consequences of being distracted or caught up in thought, lost in thought, reactive, and the ways that we might get reactive. So it's not about controlling how these moments unfold for us, but just being curious about presence and curious about distraction. And as we're doing this contemplation, you're going to discover that just because the mind is thinking doesn't mean the mind is distracted, right? Isn't it possible, and you can check this out for yourself, isn't it possible even if there's strong emotion and thought, that there can also be a simple, stable awareness, oh, it's like this. And even the thoughts may not be skillful, but there still can be an awareness, oh, it's like this. This is being known, or this is being felt. So don't presume in those moments when there's a lot of wild thoughts, let's say, don't presume that the mind's distracted. Check for yourself. Is there awareness? Is there wisdom and awareness that understands that this is being felt or this is being known? And then the last part of the contemplation before our silent time together is just to get interested in the continuity. Like once you get a sense of what it is to be present, what gets in the way of the continuity, or can you sustain this present moment awareness regardless of what's moving in the body, in the mind, in the heart? What gets in the way, and what does continuity feel like? So let's continue now in silence. We're taking this time, just as a reminder, to be interested in the experience of being present, regardless of what's coming and going in your thoughts, in your body, and getting clearer and clearer. What does it mean to be present? Because it's not about getting back to some particular experience where you can be present. It's more recognizing a capacity that's never far away. It's this wise recognition that this experience is being known. And then learning how to sustain that as best you can, and how to begin again and again as best you can. For many of us, the challenging part of this style of practice will be the cultivation of being interested. We need to learn how to be interested in the present moment. And by that we mean recognizing that this is being known. That's what the present moment is. It's that experience of knowing some aspect of what's coming and going in the body and mind in the moment. It's not about figuring anything out or defining it. It's really more simple than that, just that open recognition. What's the mind knowing? What's the knowing mind, the sensitive heart, sensing? And can we keep this in mind? The practice of not forgetting. And if you have a particular way you like to meditate, like being with your breath or being with the loving kindness phrases, repeating a prayer, so many different supports. This contemplation that I've been talking about, just recognizing moments of being aware, being present, noticing moments of distraction, can be done in the context of these other meditation techniques. Whether you're using mindfulness of breathing or whatever it might be. So what you're really interested in the context of that particular technique, whether there is this present moment, simple present moment awareness, which recognizes it's like this now. And then when the mind, because of habit, goes back to autopilot, but isn't really aware in that fresh, dynamic sense of what's unfolding and knowing that it's being known. So for the last 2 minutes, if you want to use some of your meditation techniques that you usually do use, but continue with the contemplation of recognizing when the mind is present, recognizing when the mind is distracted. There's often a very particular flavor to the continuity of present moment awareness. And it can stand out because it's, I guess you'd say, unusual. Sometimes we feel it as a kind of coolness of the heart, a peaceful coolness of the heart. So on the one hand, there's a real clarity, intimacy, but on the other hand, there's this coolness or this dispassion, this equanimity or balance with what's being sensed and felt and seen, coming and going. And in a moment when I ring the bell, or even sensing that coolness of heart, that balance, that willingness to feel what comes and goes, even as you begin to stretch and open your eyes. So we continue our interest in this continuity of awareness and what gets in the way, even as you do what you do now, to feel free even to stand if you want to or need to stretch out a little bit. And while we're getting settled, a big welcome to everyone, especially anybody who's walked in the building or joined the Zoom community for the first time. And we always record the Sunday morning talk, so that's why those of you on Zoom, I'm being spotlighted so that your video is protected. You won't show up on the internet, in other words, those of you online. It's really great to be here. My name's Mark Nunberg. I'm one of the guiding teachers along with Shelley Graff. And as many of you know, we have these 4 weekly practice groups, kind of the main event at the center. Sunday morning, I usually lead. Shelley does Sunday evening, which is for in-person only. And then I've been started last week, Tuesday evening, Zoom only, 7 to 8:30, same as Sunday night that Shelley does. And then Shelley has a hybrid like I'm doing right now on Wednesday evenings. It's been going on actually since like 1993 or 1994. It's been the Wednesday night, not Shelley, but just either Shelley or me have been doing it for a long time. So that's 7:30 to 9 on Wednesday nights, both online on Zoom or in person here in the building. You're always welcome to join in for any of those 4 groups. And of course, many other teachers lead when Shelley and I are out of town or doing our own retreat practice. And I also want to mention that for more than 30 years now, I guess 31 years, since Common Ground started in 1993, we've operated on the spirit of generosity. We call it dana, which is the Pali word for generosity. And it's really a beautiful way. And we're so fortunate that as a nonprofit, with paid staff, some of you know Gabe Keller Flores, our operating manager, and Shelley and I are also sort of staff, and then supporting all the teachers who teach here. And the building we own here and the beautiful retreat center we own in Western Wisconsin, all of that just comes from people's generosity and this beautiful circle of people receiving whatever they receive by being part of the community and giving freely in a way that makes sense in their lives. And, everyone's financial situation is different. So we can't tell you what to do or how to do it, right? You just have to experiment and see what makes you happy. And that's sort of an unusual thing, But nobody wants to give away money. But sometimes when we donate our time or donate money, even though it might sting in a sense, because there are a lot of competing things we're interested in, there are those places where it actually feels good to be generous. And that's the kind of balance you're looking for. You can always contact the office. Nancy Bowler is our bookkeeper. Gabe, as I mentioned, is our operating manager. They're in the office quite often during the week. Just send an email to the center if you have any specific questions, or you can connect with board members or other teachers. I see Omkar, one of our new board members, is here, and a few other, like our leader is often here on Sunday mornings too. I don't see our leader this morning, but a lot of people you can check in with, including myself, if you have any questions about that. And the idea is just to really feel what it feels like to be part of the community, let that land. It's a free gift. It happens because of everybody else's generosity. We have this place and we want to receive it as a free gift so that you're not giving in a kind of business relationship. Well, I came on Sunday morning, I should give something. No, because when you come on Sunday morning, that's a free gift. So you don't have to give anything. That's the point. It's a free gift from the community. So if you give, it's because you want to give. And that's how it works. And amazingly, it seems to work. Our annual budget, is around $400,000 a year. And, we don't operate with that. We're really conservative in how we take care of money here so that we don't, staff, teachers, we don't feel pressured about money, like give talks that elicit more donations or something like that, right? We can teach in a way that just feels appropriate. And we're really grateful that it seems to work out well enough the way we've been doing it. So I'll leave it there. And some of you know I've been giving talks from Ajahn Chah's book, this Collected Teachings of Ajahn Chah. He's a very respected Thai Buddhist monk who died in 1992. And I have a Google Doc you can find. If you go to the calendar listing for this Sunday morning, you'll see there's a link for the Google Doc. And it has a place where you can download the book if you want for free. It's available online. And also there's a link for Ajahn Amaro, a British Buddhist monk who reads each of the chapters. So you can listen if you'd prefer than read. But that's just for the nerds in the room, right? You don't have to. You can just listen to the talk, that's fine. But I did one other thing, which is some of the quotes I'll read today and each week I put up on that Google Doc. So if you don't want to read the whole chapter, you could just maybe read a few of the paragraphs just as a reminder. If something really hit home for you, clarified things for you, then you can maybe find that particular quote on that Google Doc. And that will be happening, for the next months, because it will take us a while to go through this book. And for me personally, as a practitioner, I found Ajahn Chah's teachings really impactful. I'm so grateful for this, uneducated in the sense of formal education, but obviously a very wise person who, taught for, basically from the late 50s he had a pretty major stroke in the early 80s. He lived for another 10 years after his stroke, but he wasn't teaching verbally at that point from the early 80s on. But was quite impactful for a lot of the Dharma, early Buddhist teachings that came to the West, from this late 60s on. So really grateful because it affected a lot of us. We're still benefiting. And this fourth chapter, he titles No Abiding. Often we hear that phrase as non-abiding. And it's a more subtle teaching, but it's really important. And, the way the Dharma is, at least how we teach it at Common Ground, we don't wait until you're far along on the path to give you the secret teachings. It's like just the whole bundle is handed to us, like, be a good person and really value non-harming. You're not harming yourself and not harming those around you. A more obvious spiritual teaching, all the way to teachings on not abiding. And it's a good sign if you're a little confused by this. Like, well, what do you mean not abiding? And he even addresses this in the chapter. We hear some of the teachings and can't really understand them. We think they shouldn't be the way they are, so we don't follow them. But really, there's a reason for all the teachings. Maybe it seems that things shouldn't be that way. Like, if someone were to ask us, like, do you trust, in terms of a general sort of emotional flavor in how you're relating to your life, do you trust passion more than dispassion or dispassion more than passion? A lot of us, a lot of the time would say, well, I think I trust passion more than dispassion, because we associate dispassion with like passivity and letting everybody walk all over us. And we associate passion with having energy and being engaged. So that's kind of why we may not want to. So like, well, no, I think I'll just leave those teachings on the Buddha over there, because I don't really trust what he's talking about. And that's really to our detriment, because we should check it out so we know for ourselves whether those are, like, what might he be meaning by like these words, this passion, or like I said at the end of the guided meditation, the coolness of heart. So we think of coolness as being like indifferent or not caring, but we haven't checked it out maybe. So a little bit more in this paragraph. At first, I didn't even believe in sitting meditation. I couldn't see what use it would be to just sit there with your eyes closed. And walking meditation, from walking from this tree to that tree. Good, there we go. I'm back. Hey, appreciate you hanging in there with our technology. It's actually, technology is in some ways a beautiful example of that word you hear a lot in Dharma centers, dukkha, which gets badly translated as suffering. I mean, I know it's a little funny because we've all experienced a lot of suffering and stress around technology, but I'm really pointing to the more subtle aspect of technology, which is, as nice as it is, I mean, none of us would choose probably forever to be without it. We may want a little break from it, a little vacation from it, but it never quite, it always comes with a cost. As nice as it is to be able to ask Siri a question or whatever, there's always a cost in that dependence, and on that it always comes with a grip. It's hard to have a dispassionate, cool relationship with our phones It's actually good practice. And like when you're looking at news or when you're looking at your social media or your email, to just see if you can have that coolness, if it's an interesting email, if it's a painful email, if it's a fantastic email, just like you're not oblivious to the pleasantness and the unpleasantness, but there's something that remains unmoved. And this really corresponds to what this chapter on non-abiding is all about. And why it's really useful to have training mechanisms like sitting in a quiet place or walking from one point to another. You just walk 30 feet this way and then you stop and you turn around and you walk 30 feet the other way. And you do that for an hour, let's say. And it, like Ajahn Chah is saying, it just initially, when he was a young monk, he thought, how stupid is that? There's got to be in this world, this terrible world where terrible stuff happens and certainly things need to be done. For me to be spending my life sitting and then walking and then sitting and walking. But it's actually what we're doing is we're taking more ordinary, non-charged experiences like chopping vegetables and buying groceries and driving on the highway and walking here and turning around and walking back and following the breath in and out. We're using these ordinary, relatively non-charged parts of our life to get interested in the continuity of present moment awareness. And in order to do that, we will, without trying, like you may never have been taught the word not abiding, but that's what you'll realize in your practice. Because when we're actually present with some continuity, that means there are phenomena coming and going, thoughts, emotions, sights, sounds. I mean, obviously, when we're present, we're still sensitive and we're more aware of that sensitivity, that exposure that comes through the eyes, through the ears, the nose, the tongue, through the skin, the sensitivity of the skin, and the sensitivity the mind has to its own thoughts and feelings. Right? That exposure doesn't go away because we're present. It becomes amplified in a sense because we're not distracted. And in order to have continuity of present moment awareness, we realize the heart that's not moved, that doesn't get seduced or caught in whatever's coming and going. Because obviously that would lead to distraction. We see an interesting sight, and we start to think about it, but we're not aware that we're thinking about it. We're lost in the thought about it. Or we hear an interesting thought sound or have an interesting thought or emotion. And then that generally leads to mental proliferation. And by that phrase, mental proliferation, we generally mean an unawareness. So there's thinking, but there's not enough a mindful awareness. Oh, thoughts. Thoughts are being known. Right? And it's hard, of course, to be aware of the thinking process, but it's possible. So this is nice to hear from Ajahn Chah right at the beginning that he himself, was like, I'm not sure I trust this training in not abiding. And so the encouragement is for all of us to have moments of that. Whatever you're doing, and start with relatively simple moments, petting the dog. Because normally we're into the passion, like whatever passion there is. You're the cutest little, And you can do that, but you want that awareness that isn't that passion. There's an awareness of that relationship you have with the dog, the love or whatever you feel with that dog. There can be an awareness that's cool, but it may be aware of your hot relationship with your dog or whatever it is, and that's okay. And just the same way that you might get really upset, you might be calling some customer support line, and it's on hold forever, listening to bad music, and then, eventually, and they can't really help you, and you just need to talk to the manager, whatever, in a way that's frustrating. And how you can be aware of all that might evoke because of your conditioning, the trauma you've had from previous times on a support line. But there could be something really cool there that simply knows it's like this. Oh, Mark's losing it, and it's like this. Mark is ready to, sometimes when I'm frustrated, I'm a bit of an impulsive type. And it's like, okay, I'm out of here. And in this sort of extreme way, like I'm never going to have a car again, or I'm never going to shop at that place again, or, I'm never going to eat that kind of food again, and but we can even see those sort of extreme swings as just nature. Oh yeah, now this is what Mark does. This is what the mind does when it gets triggered in this way, and it all feels like this. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay for this body and mind to have been conditioned in the way that this body and mind has been conditioned. And whether you like the word dispassion or non-abiding or equanimity or an unshakable balance, you can use the phrase or word that you like, but you want to start equating what you hear so much of here at Common Ground and other places, about the relevance of being present, mindful awareness, wise awareness, with this, it's an insight, like where the mind or wisdom is discovering, oh, there's this way of being, where Mark's personality gets to be Mark's personality and triggered in the way it gets triggered and moved in the way it gets moved. But there remains something that, in a sense, has this appearance of stillness or balance or not being moved, even though life continues to tumble forward and sometimes in Buddhist circles, we talk about the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. Maybe some of you have heard that. And it's really this not being identified with fear and hope or with good and bad. But it doesn't mean we're ignorant and we don't get the difference between good and bad or fear and hope. But when we see it in others and we see it in ourselves, this sort of recognition, oh, this is good or this is bad, that kind of dualistic way of dividing or seeing things, or having hope or being afraid. It just means that we're cultivating this interest, this presence that keeps remembering, oh, this is just the next experience being known. That's what's cool. Cool in that kind of not hot sense. And it's also cool in the other sense of the word, Because it actually is cool that the mind, the heart, has this capacity to be unmoved. That's why in Buddhism, in early Buddhism, we talk about the unconditioned. There's this conditioned realm, and that includes our personalities, by the way, the conditioned realm, like causes and conditions. You hear us use that phrase sometimes. It's just causes and conditions, it's the way it is. So this kind of more relative reality of causes and conditions of things happening because of these innumerable complex causes and conditions, right? And like, where's the freedom in that? When my mind is identified with that complex unfolding of causes and conditions, it's pretty easy to start feeling helpless or to be desperately attempting to get in control, to get a step ahead of it all, and to dominate it in a way that I bend the complex flow of causes and conditions to my will, so things turn out to be the way I want them to be, right? It's like a endless struggle and war, which nobody ever wins. It's a little bit like children, I didn't raise children, but I was an elementary school teacher for a while, wrongly thinking it would be an easy job when I was starting to get really into meditation and wanted a lot of time. So hard. But, there's this sense of, as a teacher, especially, like I'll get organized, I'll have structures, positive and negative reinforcements, and I'll bend these wild beasts to my will, and we'll have a stable, organized classroom. And but there's something about, especially when you have a larger group, like 30 kids, it's something about that dynamic that's just not controllable. You can participate, and there are relatively wise ways to participate and relatively unwise ways to participate. But it's never going to be stable, right? It's always going to have that sort of chaos element to it. There's just too many things at play, like the kind of home that that child is coming from that day, and what happened earlier that day. And then that child brings it in, just like we bring in our leftover reverberations from our previous interactions when we show up as the teacher or whatever. And even the weather, and who knows, solar flares, and what affects what's going on in the classroom, the diets that we eat, and all of that. And that will never end. And if we think our job is to somehow get on top of all that or be a step ahead of all that, it's one, impossible, and two, stressful to keep trying to get on top of it all, to get a step ahead of it all. Because that's really not that different than, trying to dominate, which we all know is not like, oh, I don't want to be the person who colonizes the elementary classroom and imposes my will, because we know that's bad. But that's kind of our basic approach to life. We do it with our bodies, we do it with our partners or good friends, our families. We try to shape things in a way that will make us feel safe. And we're never going to stop that, and that's okay. But we want to understand that that's limited at best. It's not going to lead to ultimate happiness or release from stress. And most of the time, when we're wrongly relating to those efforts to dominate or control or make things right, it's really a strong cause for suffering. Not only for ourselves, but for those around us. That's how we always are bumping into each other in different ways. Yeah, so Ajahn writes, or he didn't write this, of course. These are transcriptions of talks he gave to the lay people in Thailand and Western monks and Asian monks and other people who would show up at the monastery. He said, if we just focus our attention on the mind constantly, like what's the mind knowing, what's the mind doing, then we have the gist of the practice. Whether we experience mental states, which the world knows as good and bad, we don't forget ourselves, right? We don't forget there's a knowing mind knowing this. There's a feeling heart feeling this. We don't forget that. We keep that in mind. That's what we mean by keeping the present moment in mind, is we're aware that there is a knowing, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, or a feeling, this capacity to feel. So what's the heart and mind feeling? And even now, like listening to a talk, we can both be comprehending the words of the talk, but there can be this subtle presence. Oh yeah, hearing, seeing, feeling is like this. That whatever's going on for you right now, that it's an experience being known and felt. Right? Do you see how that's available for each of us right now? We can either be present in that way, or we can be, which is more the case, distracted, unaware that it's like this, that this is an experience being felt or known. And when you get better at recognizing what it is to be present, it really has that sense of breadth and depth at the same time, which is kind of interesting. It makes it a distinct experience that may make it easier for you to recognize it. It really feels different than how we normally experience our life and, the busyness of our days. It's almost like I sometimes, and it's good to use poetic sort of language sometimes, but I sometimes talk about it as growing roots, little rootlets in all directions into the moment. There's a very visceral sense of connection with the way it is. Whereas when we're lost in thought, we have the context of the thought, so we don't necessarily feel it. It may not be on the surface, but underneath the sort of veneer of the surface, there's a sense of being separate or apart when we're lost in thought. And you might have noticed this, like you might be obsessing about something. And then in that transition from being obsessive for the 15 minutes, let's say, to kind of coming back to being present, you might feel how yucky it was, how separate, how isolated the heart was in the obsessing. Because we've been disconnected. We've been lost in our little thought bubble or emotional bubble or whatever the mind had constructed and then got lost in. And this happens whenever we think about the past and get lost in that thought, or think about the future, because those things aren't here and now. So I can be planning the future or distilling important information from the past without forgetting that it's all here and now. This embodied reality here and now. The mind is remembering the past, remembering what was learned or what was felt, and what the distillation is from that past. But I'm remembering that that's all happening here and now, being known here and now. That's why we emphasize body. And in this chapter, the Ajahn Chah talks about the 4 postures. So, the nuns and monks, they'd study the 4 postures because we're always doing sitting or lying down or standing or walking, it kind of covers it. And it really helps develop the continuity through the day. And like I was saying earlier, in terms of a meditative anchor, these postures, whatever posture we're in, most of us are sitting now. If we've been training ourselves to be using the physicality of sitting as a way to sort of realize that cool, balanced presence. Oh yeah, sitting's like this. I'm neither for nor against the experience of sitting, the sensations of sitting. But we've cultivated this capacity to be aware and to keep that awareness in mind that sitting's like this. Same with standing, same with lying down. Did I miss one? Anyway, the 4. Walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. Yeah, and we can really get in that place of abiding because it's a relatively neutral experience. And more we just start to see our participation in the moment, whatever we're doing, something complex like interacting with another human being or just standing, waiting for the bus or something like that. We can start to sense, because philosophically it just seems so weird when people say, oh, it's nature, not self. So it just seems like you can have endless philosophical arguments, like what does that mean? And are we really real? Do we have agency, or is it just, but it's actually experiential. When people might ask, well, what does the Buddha mean by anatta, the not self understanding experience? Well, when we talk about there not being any separate self, permanent separate self, that experience is this experience. It's not a different experience. This, like, if you said something now to me or did something right now that was really humiliating for me, so something that we would normally associate as being really personal for me, maybe you, that experience is nature. So when we talk about the impersonal nature that it's just causes and conditions, and that this cool, dispassionate understanding, oh yeah, sometimes it's like this. We're really hot, or really cold, or really in between, or really intense, or really calm, or really, greedy, a lot of greed, or a lot of contentment, a lot of metta, a lot of love, a lot of hate. Sometimes it's like this. And that understanding, that wise understanding that's not confused by the ups and downs of life and of a conditioned personality. Oh yeah, sometimes it's like this. And we don't have to get sucked into the identification because we have this other way of being, which is you call wisdom, or you could call equanimity, or you could call it not abiding, not identifying with what's moving. And then we really begin to understand that all the activity is just what it is. And it makes sense intellectually that all of this that's happening, including my most personal thoughts and my most disturbing emotions and the things that, the aspects of my personality that make me proud and the aspects of my personality that I would never want anybody to know about, that the whole shebang is nature. Right? That makes sense, doesn't it? As opposed to like picking and choosing, like this is me, but all that other stuff is nature. No, of course, everything is nature, and by nature we just mean it is part of this interdependent, complex movement of causes and conditions. And nothing stands apart. That idea or that even that visceral sense, no, no, I'm back here. That's just part of what's moving, right? It's part of everything else. Now, the way we go from philosophy to experience is we cultivate the continuity of present moment awareness, because the reality, the experience of not abiding, of seeing the empty, natural unfolding of causes and conditions, happens when we develop some real stability and continuity of present moment awareness. It naturally arises then. We don't have to you don't even have to ever heard a talk like this. If you just got some instructions that encouraged you to be present, and you just on your own figured out how to have more and more continuity, you would really have the deepest insights. So even though we call it a path of wisdom, it doesn't mean you need a lot of learning. You might need a lot of sort of capacity for articulation to teach. But in terms of the freedom that the Buddha realized and so many people since have realized, this freedom of non-attachment, non-clinging, you don't need a lot of like philosophical understanding. You just need to cultivate the supporting causes for that freedom. And the supporting causes, when we understand, the mind understands what being present is, and we do the work to make that the predominant habit to be present, then all of a sudden we understand why that coolness, that dispassion is so peaceful. So it's like that line from the Bible you might have heard, in the world, but not of the world. I guess it was in some context. I think it was in John something or other, the section of the Bible. But anyway, I think someone asked the Buddha about his disciples, and he said that, I am and they are in the world, but not of the world. And the idea is that, I can be engaged. I'm not afraid of responsibilities and being a parent or whatever one does with their life. But there's something that isn't confused by that engagement, those responsibilities. It actually frees up the heart to be more nimble and creative with our duties and responsibilities, precisely because there's not the attachment. So that's another way to explore. And hopefully some of you will stay for the small groups. We both, for those of you online on Zoom and those of you in the room, it's optional, always optional, but we organize groups of 3 or 4 people just to have a 15-minute conversation at the end on Sunday morning. It's just a way to build community. And it's actually good for your practice to, like I'm suggesting now, to think about places in your life where you really felt there was that presence, that intimacy, that depth. The subtlety is the depth, and the breadth, like the mind didn't forget the context of what was going on. So the depth and breadth of awareness, but without the attachment. Because when we're really attached, we have a kind of presence, but it's a presence that's colored by the attachment. So we want that intimacy, like really listening, really opening, really feeling, but without the tightness of the attachment or the identification or the expectation or the agenda, those sort of things. And you could share in the small group or just in your own reflections in the days ahead, where do I have the awareness, but with a lot of attachment. And how does that work for me? Is it helping? And where do I have that presence, that intimacy without the attachment? And how's that work? Do I trust that? And then, and that way you find your own way. Like you don't want to take it just from the Buddha that, oh yeah, this is the way. We want to check it out and realize for ourselves, oh yeah, this just works so much better. To be radically present, intimate, connected, and in a funny way, unmoved. But that, like I said right at the beginning of the talk, that's okay if that just like doesn't strike us right. Like, but I want people to be moved, and I want to be moved. I don't want to be flat because we don't really know what it would mean to be unmoved, except to interpret it as like not caring or being passive. That's why we have to check it out. Because the movement of the heart, like love, that's going to keep moving because that's nature. That's conditioned nature. So when we say dispassionate, there's something that is cool, but it sees everything. It's like everything is free to move. So it's like, I just been generally moving in this direction, but especially since I got really sick late last fall, I just been crying a lot. I watch a silly movie and I just want to cry, and hear a song and have tears in my eyes. So, screws generally, when we do our practice, everything gets a little looser. But that it's not like I get lost in the tears or in the movement of emotion. But it means that there's a lot more emotion moving. But there's something that is aware. It's like, yeah, that's how it is sometimes. The heart feels really moved. I don't need to explain it to myself. I don't need to define it. I don't need to decide if it's good to be tearing up or crying or not good. It's so liberating just to allow ourselves to be sensitive, emoting beings, to be a person who has preferences, likes and dislikes, but not tight about any of that. And the thing is, like, we're afraid I got to get in control of my likes and dislikes, but actually being intimate is the way to be skillful, not sort of to impose something. So the children are going to walk in just a second. We'll say goodbye to all of you on Zoom. Thanks for coming. Lucy's here today, so Lucy will take over. And all of you who want to stay and be in small groups, just hang in there on the Zoom screen. And Lucy, in a few minutes or in a minute or two, will divide you up into groups of 3 and 4. And those in the room, please stay for another few minutes. The kids are going to come in and sing a song for us. And then if you want to stay for the small groups, just hang out and